Hi, and welcome to another episode of Smart Friends. My name is Michelle Martello from Menuna Designs, and today I'm so excited to be sharing my friend Michelle Warner of themichellewarner.com. Michelle designs tiny companies that are built to last. And with an MBA from one of the world's top business schools and 15 plus years growing small businesses, she knows how to make a business work. She's also the creator of Networking That Pays, the introvert-friendly, always awkward-free connection system that brings in reliable leads, consistent referrals, and meaningful connections for your business in just one message today. And that's why I'm excited to chat with you today, Michelle, because the idea of networking, especially now, a lot of people, this brings up a lot of emotions. A lot of people think it feels very old school. They have images of like going to cocktail parties or hopping around with people in suits. And for a lot of us, especially for those of us who are on our own or solopreneurs, and maybe we don't have the corporate experience, it just feels very old school. So I'd love to know, what's just the word networking mean to you?
Yeah, well, first I want to acknowledge that it is absolutely awful, the standard definition of networking. I am the first person who is hiding at the bar trying to, eat all the appetizers or in the bathroom all night because I just don't want to talk to anybody. So I agree, like that standard definition of networking does not work for me. I'm an introvert myself, and I was just in a situation where I had to figure out how to meet people. So I'm a big fan of redefining terms and figuring out ways that will actually work for you. So to me, networking means understanding who you need to meet in order to advance your business, and then understanding that there is a benefit to having lasting relationships with people. So who do you want to meet and who do you want to develop a real relationship with that is going to last for 5 years, 10 years, and give both of you, multiplying effects and benefit to your business? It is not for me about going out and trying to meet a one-off client every single time you're networking, but rather how can you meet people who you can pair up with, might I say, kind of like this, right? And just continue to build wins for each other over the years.
Man, okay, you just gave me a flashback of a conference I went to. I think it was pre-COVID. I went to a conference and I went by myself. I didn't know anybody there, and I did exactly that. I went to the bar, I got a little mocktail, and then I was like, I kind of recognize these people from the internet, but I am so shy. I went back up to my room, and what a wasted opportunity of because everyone felt very cliquey and very they all knew each other and now friends. And I'm like that kid on the playground, I'm just going to hide over here and go to the swing set. What a waste.
Awful. It's what an awful feeling too. Not only is it a waste, but it's just an awful, awful feeling.
Yeah. Side note, Michelle and I often talk about going to conference and blowing off the sessions and just hanging out together. So that's
Absolutely. I'm very good at that. But it's because I know who I want to meet there. There are other ways to meet the people there. So if you do a little work in advance, you can get away with that.
I love that. I love the idea. And it's like with anything else. It's like clarity in your business. If you're clear about who you want to attract and who you want to work with, gosh, this makes so much sense. So I had a couple of questions from my readers. I asked them, I told them I was going to be talking to you, and I had a couple folks reach out and have some specific questions about networking if you're cool with that. So I know this one person who wrote this particular question, she actually does a lot of in-person stuff, and she runs her own events and things like that. And so she asks, what's the right mindset and conversation starter if you find yourself in a room where you don't know anyone? I hate starting with, so what do you do? Such an American thing, right? What do you do? How do we get over that first hump?
Yeah, this is a great question, and you're going to learn something about me right now, and that I'm usually going to redefine the question that you're asking too, because in order to find the answer, we got to ask a different question. Something I call sequence over strategy. The order in which we do things is more important than what we do. So I love this question, but I'm going to encourage you to not start thinking about networking when you have an event to attend. This is like a major mistake that people make, is that feels like the first step is walking in the door. And that is 100% incorrect, because you're right. If the first time you're thinking about this event is when you walk in the door and all of a sudden you're confronted by all these faces, yeah, it's going to be really awkward. Instead, I want to push it way back. Let's add 3 steps before you ever walk into that door. And number 1, I want you to get clear on who and why you want to meet people in that room. Why are you going to the event? What is your end goal for meeting those people? Get clear on that. And I call those connection avatars then. Who are the same way you have a client avatar? Who is the connection avatar that you would want to connect with? And a lot of times these are people, again, like you and I. Let's like use you and I as an example. If I were to walk into a room, I am not trying to meet clients. I am trying to meet somebody who is collaborative, who probably is talking to some of my future clients so that we can do events like this and go ahead and always have events where we're all getting in front of a number of different clients at a time. Long story short, kind of have an idea of who you're trying to meet, and I would encourage that person to probably not be a client. And then when you have that kind of clarity, when you walk in that room, you can have some immediate filtering questions in mind to figure out, does this person that I'm talking to fit these qualifications? Because guess what? If they fit the qualifications, it's going to be really easy to have a conversation. The awkwardness goes away when you're prepared and you're clear on who you want to meet. Awkwardness in networking exists because we don't know why we're talking to a person. So then you default into small talk. If you know who you're talking to, then you can go into a room and figure out, does that person fit the profile of who you want to talk to? If they do, very easy to continue a conversation because you naturally have something in common that you can help each other with, so the conversation flows. If they don't fit that filtering question, then you go into your tools of every other network and say, oh, have to slide out, or I have to run over here. I see someone I know, and exit out of the conversation. Don't continue in a conversation that's going nowhere.
You just brought up something, again, seems simple when you put it out there. I remember going to a conference and I met someone, we have a conversation, and we did that awkward exchange of cards, and then he set up a call with me. And honestly, we had like this call and it was such a wasted half an hour, 45 minutes. He was such a different part of his journey. And but you feel awkward and you don't want to be like, yeah, I got to go now. And this is not a fit. And I'm like, if I had just done some prep work or had some things in my back pocket of like, hey, it was great to meet you, I got to skedaddle before I'm like booking a call with somebody that is totally not a good fit. So I'm wasting additional time. I'm still cringing about that 3 years later. So.
Oh, we've all done it, but that's the key. This is the benefit of a networking event, is after one question, it's really easy to get out of the conversation because there's no kind of bond there yet. And so have that one filtering conversation question, get out if they're not a fit. But if they are, then it's worth your time. And that is, again, the worst thing about networking is when we don't go in with a plan, you end up with this stack of cards. The story I always tell is at the startup I was running before I had this business, I was at a convention in DC, and I got back on the plane and I traveled a ton then. So I was upgraded to first class. So I'm with all the sales bros up in first class. And I have this stack of business cards like this tall from this event. And this guy sits down next to me and he looks at it and he's like, whoa, you had a great day. And I'm thinking, I had a terrible day. I don't know who any of these people are. This was such a waste of my time. And that story, that moment is kind of an impetus of all this networking that pays, because it's a massive waste of time if you don't take the 5 minutes beforehand to get clear on who do I actually want to meet and what do I want out of it.
Oh my God. So we just cleaned out my husband's closet this weekend, and the stack of cards on his dresser of just because he does a lot of in-person stuff, and he's like, don't know him. I'm like, also, business cards, side note, I have a whole blog post on creating modern business cards that make sense. I put my photo on both sides of a card. Do you know how many people do not put a photo on a card? And then you're like, I have no idea who this person is. People have a random company name. You're like, I don't know. I'm not going to be arsed to go go Google them. So, that stack of cards, it's such an interesting, yeah. I'm having all these flashbacks. So I love this about the in-person stuff. So obviously, a lot of us are doing stuff virtually still, and will continue to do so. So, this question comes from a reader as well. So how do we make connections online so it doesn't feel salesy? And even if we've reached out once, how do we keep the conversation going when there's no next step or no pretext? I sometimes worry about wasting people's time catching up. And I worry about people wasting my time too. So I think you covered a little bit of this, but I'd love to get your take on this.
Yeah, and same rules go here. Be clear on who you're wanting to meet. You are unlikely to waste somebody's time or waste your time if you are clear on who your connection avatars are. And if that person fits that avatar, talk to them. Maybe it won't go anywhere, but most of the time it will go somewhere, and it's never going to be a waste of time to explore those things. Whereas also if you have that connection avatar, you are going to know when someone doesn't fit it. And so if you end up in a conversation, or if you end up in some virtual, networking event, You can, again, kind of excuse yourself, or you can say you don't book the 30-minute call. It's fine. It's totally fine. If you're doing that, you just need the clarity on who you're trying to meet. And then in terms of keeping the conversation going, I don't mean to sound naive about this, but if you are talking to the right people and you're doing that homework first, the conversation will naturally keep going because there will be ideas on what you want to talk about, what you want to collaborate with. Like, you will become fountains to each other and want to continue the conversation. It gets really awkward when you're trying to force something.
Do you have any kind of like gut check? I'm just curious about this. Obviously you've got a whole system about, how you create your kind of go-to plan, but is there a gut check that you have when you're talking to somebody that it's a good fit or it's not a good fit?
Yeah, a couple of things I look for. Number one, you are not trying to network with clients, with potential clients. That's my number one rule. Your network is actually pretty limited in who you can be connected with. It's generally under 100 people, which may sound like a lot, but it's not a lot. And so you want those people to be steady people in your life, meaning you don't want that 100, or it's usually like 50 to 60 people. You don't want them constantly turning over. Because if they're constantly turning over, then you're essentially starting from scratch every single time and you're like cold calling. So instead, the goal is to create a network of consistent 50 to 60 people. And that may sound like a big number, a small number. You don't need that many immediately. And if you are creating that type of network, then you are looking for people who are more colleagues and peers, where you can collaborate and you both share the same audience, but in non-competitive ways. So as you collaborate, you're continually reaching each other's audience, which is where the clients are. And so that's kind of my number one rule, is like, let's make sure that you are not trying to network to meet potential clients. Instead, you are networking to build relationships with people with whom you can collaborate, share each other's audiences, and meet clients in that way.
Okay, that right there is like boom, right? Because I know often when we're going to conferences, we're meeting people who do what we do, right? So I started my life as a web designer. I know quite a few web designers. I've moved out of that space. So now I keep it like a personal Rolodex of like, hey, this person specializes in this, this, and this. So I can refer out. 15 years ago, we would have maybe been seen as competitors, right? So this is such a smart thing of like, think about where you're going, who you're trying to connect to, and are you trying to talk to somebody who's basically doing exactly what you are? Or are you trying to talk to someone with adjacent audience or relative, similar audiences? And Michelle and I agree. We've traded clients back and forth. We've traded work back and forth. So it's finding folks that, hey, I know this person can do X thing. My client actually needs X thing. And it may take a few years. Like we just traded the client that I've worked with for 5 years now. But this client was now at a point where she was ready to work with Michelle. So, and Michelle like blew it out of the water. So like, having those kinds of things in your back pocket also makes you look good, by the way. When you're able, not all the work needs to come directly to you. When you're able to share to your network and you're able to help your clients achieve the thing they want to achieve, guess what? They're going to remember you and they're going to then share you with other people as well. So,
exactly.
Yeah.
Can I share a couple of examples to make it real
please.
Folks? I think it can be difficult to vision. The most generic example that I think is the easiest to understand is, let's think about the wedding industry. If you are a wedding photographer, you do not want to try to meet every single potential couple that is getting engaged in your town. That's going to be exhausting and you're constantly going to be starting over. Instead, you want to meet every caterer, every wedding planner, every DJ, every insert all the wedding people industry, because then you can all share clients and you can all share referral circles. So your networking goals is not to go to the new bride convention. I don't know if that exists. I just made it up. But you're not trying to meet every bride who's thinking about her wedding. You're trying to meet all those support folks. And then another really interesting example that I think illustrates this kind of parallel but not competitive idea is, I have seen in the last year several examples, which I don't know where these came from, of divorce coaches who are pairing up with therapists. And once you see that, it makes so much sense.
So smart.
Therapist is helping someone through the emotional journey of a divorce. What happens during the emotional journey of a divorce? There's a lot of logistics that get in the way of being able to make the emotional breakthroughs, right? There's money, there's so many logistics. So a divorce coach is a great collaboration partner, a great person to have in your network if you're a therapist, because you can refer your clients out to kind of go to the divorce coach and get the logistics taken care of. And so that allows both of you to stay in your lanes, divorce coach, therapist, have the same clients. It's not a competitive situation, but both of your clients do better, right? Because if you're the divorce coach trying to deal with logistics, the therapist is helping your client move past the emotional. And if you're the therapist who is trying to help your client get past the emotional, the logistics aren't going to get in the way of that journey. So that's a great example of a connection avatar. If you're a divorce coach, go look for therapists. If you're a therapist who works with a lot of folks going through divorce, go look for divorce coaches to build relationships with, because that will be collaborative in return over time.
It's so smart. I fell into this when I started my business. So I started my business before social media, before we had, frankly, before anybody was really doing newsletters and all this. And I remember I'd been doing my yoga studio's website. And I'd been trading yoga for the free website. And so my teacher at the time was just like, oh, you need to meet my business coach. And granted, this was like mid 2000s, right? So not a huge thing like it is today. And I went out there, I visited him in person, and I said, I don't know, maybe we can work together. I was so green. I had no idea. He sent me my first 6 clients. And from there, that completely built my business. And I kind of just fell into it. But I knew I wanted to do yoga studio websites. I knew he had those clientele ready to go, and he needs somebody reliable. And it was such a great fit. I mean, that first couple of years, he really sustained me. So it's just
example of thinking about those connection avatars, right? Again, like you go to the yoga conference, you're not going to go in there and try to meet every single yoga store owner. That is a lot. But you meet the person who is coaching 10 of them at a time. That's fantastic. And guess what? If you were to walk in a room and have a conversation with him, the conversation would flow, because he would talk to you about the struggles, like, oh, they're doing so well, but they can't figure out how to get a website up, and that's such a missing piece, and that's a stress. Like, there would be a very natural back and forth.
Yeah.
If you try to start getting into a conversation with every new studio owner, it's a little awkward.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I always tell people too that, especially in my space, when I'm mentoring web designers, get to know the software that people are using. So, you know, I learned the software tools, and that and getting featured on those software sites actually can bring you a lot of potential clients as well. Because you're showing up as that vetted expert, and you're connecting to that community that needs your stuff. So I love
when I have clients, if you have clients who work with a consistent software provider, then a great connection avatar. I love that example too.
Well, I want to get into just a couple of little tactics, if you're cool with this, because everyone always wants to know, like, what's CRM and what's software, and, like, you know, what's the magical tool that will help me keep track of these 50 to 100 people? Just tell me, are you using something crazy fancy?
No, and it's whatever matches your brain is the correct answer. I happen to use, I would tell you that I use Notion. In reality, I use a Google Doc spreadsheet. And it is not fancy, and it is not, there's nothing about a system is going to be the make or break here. It's whatever matches your brain.
I love that. Yeah. Because, you know, I find, you know, it's funny, I'm giving a presentation later where it's all about my favorite tools. And I'm like, I love a spreadsheet. I love a very simple spreadsheet, because guess what? It's not going to break down. It's always going to work. I can just go there and see everything at a glance. And again, it's what is going to work for you. Sometimes the simplest thing is just the simplest thing. So
100%. And let me also remind you that my most successful clients with networking are working with a stable network of like 5 to 50 people. I know I said it can be up to 150, but that is the science that goes to your entire world. So that's your personal life. That's everything. Business, really, we're going to cap it at 80. Most people are at 25 to 50. So if you're at 25 to 50 and they are consistent, they're not changing, you know, maybe there's 10% turnover, of course, because lives change. But it's not that hard to keep track of 25 to 50 people. You know, like, I feel like we all feel like we need, the spreadsheets. And because you're constantly turning over network and you're constantly trying to stay in touch with every single person in LinkedIn. No, again, like, let's go back to sequence over strategy. You're clear on who you want to have a relationship with. I always say people need to earn a spot in your network by fitting one of those connection avatars. And then when you're at 25 to 50, it's easy. They stay on your mind because they're just around to remember to talk to you, Michelle.
Well, you know, I'm going to send you dog pictures on Instagram, so that's going to be
exactly. Okay, rant's over, but I think people get really excited about the organization of this thing when in actuality, if you do that work, you know who you want to connect with. It's not even an issue.
It's not an issue. So Well, let's dive into a little bit more of these tactics. So like, what is something that folks can do pretty quickly, pretty easily, to build up this list of 25 to 50 to 100 folks?
Yeah. Well, one thing we always talk about is how do you get introduced to new people? That's the question I always get, because now I've told you about these connection avatars. So now everyone's panicked because you develop a connection avatar and you realize you don't know any of these people. So how do you start to get introduced to them? The best way I will tell you is if you have a mutual connection. That's going to be our highest ROI, highest success. But another wonderful way, especially if it's online and somebody who is doing things online that you're trying to connect with, is just sending them a simple, specific thank you letter. And I call this like sticking out like a sore thumb in a really good way, because very few people who try to connect with folks put any kind of real effort into it. So if you are putting even a minimal amount of effort and specificity into these notes, you will be remembered. So let's say that you want to connect with somebody who's just a little ahead of you. I don't want you trying to connect with Oprah. That is not going to go well. But somebody who's a little ahead of you, so it might be a little intimidating, and maybe they get a lot of noise on their social media pages. So a lot of that is going to be people commenting something like, oh, thank you, I needed to hear this today, right? Because they're going to share whatever. And then all the comments are going to be relatively generic. If you go in there with what I call the thank you note approach and you connect in a specific way, then they are going to be way more likely to respond to you and be open to a conversation. So what do I mean by the thank you note? I mean that you want to think about something that they have said or done that you have seen that has had some sort of impact on you. Now, this doesn't mean you have to have implemented a 50-step system of theirs and have 2 years of results to share. But you want to say like, hey, I saw you say blah, blah, blah last week. And as I've been walking my dog, because I walk my dog 40,000 times a day, as I've been walking my dog, like it's just been bubbling in my head. And, I have this realization today about how this could impact my work or what it's going to mean to me. And that doesn't take very long to do, right? If you actually want to connect with someone, it is likely you know something about them, or it's likely you can take a look at what they're saying, and you can send this thank you note that acknowledges something of theirs that has had an impact on you, has made you think in a different way, has made you approach something in a different way. And you can tell them that specifically. And then guess what? In a sea of other people saying, hey, thank you, I needed to hear this today, you saying, thank you, this specific thing you said was so interesting to me that I've been thinking about it on every dog walk for the past week. And today I realized how it applies to my work and how I'm going to implement it. Thank you so much. Guess what? They're going to respond.
Yeah.
And I can tell you that this is so uncommon. I teach this thank you when I go and teach the system. I teach this to folks in free trainings, like 100, 200, 500 people. And I say, hey, if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn after this, I would love that. But I'm going to need you to send me a specific thank you about something you learned in this training, or I'm not going to connect with you. It's just my little challenge for folks to make sure they learn this.
Yeah.
I will tell you, 90% of the people who connect with me on LinkedIn don't send anything. I mean, that where I am directly teaching you a strategy and saying, I will not accept your connection if you take 2 seconds and tell me one specific thing you learned in this. And I just get a sea of connections. And then guess what? The 3 people who bothered to do this, I remember them for months afterwards, just because it's so uncommon. And that's where we want to stick out like a sore thumb, but in a good way. Everyone else is doing the absolute bare minimum. So if you literally take 15 to 30 seconds to write something, it will be remembered. That is how low the bar is. Because we're all in like this efficiency and just connect and just have numbers mindset. That if you just stop and breathe for 30 seconds, you have such an unfair advantage.
It's so funny you say that. I taught at a college class a couple weeks ago, and I invited everybody to reach out. I gave them my email. Like I said, hey, I'm happy to give you guidance or whatever. One person reached out, but she thanked me. She said, oh, you talked about XXX. I want to do XXX. And I said, hey, happy to help, reach out anything. The fact that she did that, I'm going to remember her, right? I'm going to remember
backwards for her.
Exactly. I'm going to be happy to help because listen, everyone likes their ego stroked, right? A little bit. So like, hey, but we also want to be impactful. So it's like when someone's like, oh, I loved your talk about XYZ. And I'm like, because we're also not getting especially virtually, we're not necessarily getting the feedback we need to know of like, am I making an impact? Am I just talking to the void? I was speaking to college students at 9 a.m. Half of them were half asleep, but to know that it resonated with somebody, like, that's going to make me go back and teach more. That's going to go, so, and it's so true. This minimum viable effort. I always tell web designers, if you just return emails and you just communicate, you're 90% ahead of everybody else, because nobody's doing that. Because there's, like you said, they're so obsessed with, I gotta have. Do you really though? If you had 10 clients this year, that might fill up your docket.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's absolutely amazing how you do remember those, because the next question I always get is people say, okay, fine, you'll respond to me, but then what do I do after that? No, like, I'm so thrilled that you are trying this, kind of like your experience with the student. I don't do this for my health. I actually want to have impact to help people. Yeah. And so when somebody responds and says, I'm thinking about this, I'm doing this, I'm going to respond and say, oh, that's so cool. Tell me more. Tell me what works.
Yeah.
Like, I am going to open that door for you to walk through and build a relationship with me.
Mm-hmm.
It's on you to keep going, but now we have something really nice to build a relationship on. And so you can keep updating me. I'm going to keep asking you other questions. And eventually, there's probably going to be an opportunity to do something together if it makes sense. And so that's why that opens the door not only to an initial communication, but to an ongoing one, because now I'm on board with you. Like, I'm in. I want to see you win. Kind of like this one student, when you get specific, gosh, the student paid attention. And so I'm going to bend over backwards for you.
So I think this dovetails nicely to my next question. I mean, is this what motivated you to create networking that pays?
Yeah, absolutely. So this system is one that I built for myself when I had a startup prior to this company. I was in a situation where I had a digital marketing background. I built email lists. I did all the efficient stuff. But this particular company, I needed to have very specific relationships in place, and I didn't have them in place. And I told you I am painfully shy and introverted. But I had been in business school and I had taken 2 semesters of classes on network science. All of this is backed by science, by the way, what we're talking about today. And so I took that experience, because I was in a do or die situation. And it's like, I got to figure out how to make this work. And so I took that experience and I built this system for myself, and it implemented it. Everything, yay, went well. Fast forward 10 years, my regular day job is fixing business models and helping people get a business model moving in the direction that they want it to. And I started realizing one of the biggest barriers in the way of that was people didn't have the correct networks. So I started teaching my clients, and then a friend of mine got wind of that, a friend who has a program for beginning students, and she got wind of this and she said, oh my gosh, my students need this. And we started talking, when it eventually led where she told me, if you don't create this into a course, I'm stealing it from you. And she said that it wasn't actually going to happen. I was like, okay, like, there's a need for this. But she saw, again, talking about connection avatars, she saw that her students had a missing hole here, and they weren't getting the results she wanted because they didn't have the correct network. She didn't want to teach it, though, and didn't know how to teach it. So she said, get me this information. I'm going to get all my students signed up for your course, because then they will get such better results from my course. Like, that's a beautiful collaboration. And so that was the impetus for me to finally get it into course form. And now I just love having it, because I have it for my clients. I have it for other connections. Now, we license it out to business building programs where they need this information, because it's the missing piece. Because everybody thinks in that traffic mindset and just numbers. No, like, I know I've been talking about 25, 50 people, like the right 2 to 3 connections, if you're just getting started, completely change the game. And that right 10 connections completely change the game. Like, that is the simple but not easy route, right? Where those, just having a few correct connections changes the game for just about every business.
I mean, it's like the power of compounding interest, right? If you keep making regular deposits and it just starts to pile up, and then, you look at it a year later, it's like, whoa, how did that happen? I was just doing these regular things. So, well, I'm so thrilled. Thank you so much for sharing all of this with us. So you did mention that your day job is business models. So how else can people get a hold of you, get in touch with you? She also has a podcast called Sequence Over Strategy, and I'll make sure to link that. But how can people get a hold of you and work with you?
Yeah, I'm over at themichellewarner.com. And if you're on that homepage, you will see an opportunity to sign up for my email list, to check out the podcast. And every month I do a free roundtable where we come together as a community and I answer questions. And that registration is right on the homepage as well. So all those ways you are free to connect with me. I would love to see you there. And there's also a free training about more networking. And you can find all of that right on the homepage at themichellewarner.com. And I have a bunch of podcast episodes about networking too. So if you want to get into that, I would encourage you to check it out there. So look at me breaking all the rules, telling you 5 different ways you can connect with me, but you are welcome to. And if you connect with me on LinkedIn, you better send me a specific thank you note about something you learned in this.
Oh, I love that. That's such a good, You have to let me know how many folks did it from this. I'll want to know. Well, thank you, Michelle. I'm so appreciative, and I will make sure to put all of Michelle's links along with this video so that you have everything. And just thank you again for sharing your wisdom with us.
Oh my gosh. Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure.